So that's what I'm about in the world. That's what I'm trying to do, is make the world a better place by helping people take these skills and actually apply them, because the impact has been remarkable. I was teaching in Luxembourg. I was teaching MBA students, and I told them all at the start of the class, you have to pick someone you're going to practice these skills with. And one of them was a dad. And he said, I want to practice with my sons. They're 5 and 3. And I said, okay. And I said, so what is it that makes you want to practice with them? He said, I've spent most of their lives away. I've been working in Brazil and they live in Luxembourg. And we're completely alienated. And I think the relationship is broken forever.
Oh.
Which is heartbreaking, right? And he said, I get around them. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I get nervous. I get frustrated. I yell. I always seem to do the wrong thing. I said, okay. And so as we started to go through the course, I was coaching him and having conversations with him. At the end of the 3-month course, his final report was, things have changed completely. My sons run to me. They throw themselves on me. They tell me they love me all the time. They fight over who gets to sit next to me at meals. They beg me to read them stories at night. That's not the only time I've experienced that.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about building trust. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Darryl Stickel. Dr. Darryl is one of the world's leading experts on trust, the founder of Trust Unlimited, and the author of Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. You can reach Dr. Darryl at his website, and I'll include a link in the show notes. Welcome, Dr. Darryl. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Thank you, Linda. And just call me Darryl. It's
Darryl.
Such a pleasure to be here with you and your listeners.
Thank you. Thank you. And today, as we're talking about trust and building trust, this is such an important topic because I think as a society, we have just an all-time low of trust. We have a deficit of trust. And there's good reasons for that, because we have scammers and we have con artists and we have conspiracy theories and we have accusations and blaming and all sorts of things. It is hard to trust anyone, and it's hard to trust anything that we hear. And that leaves us in a place that's very uncertain. So where would you like to start? I'm hoping we can cover it on kind of a macro level, like how does trust affect the world and the problems we have, and more of a micro level, a personal level, like in my family, my relationship.
Right.
So let's get started.
Let's get started. So I think trust is incredibly important. It's the social lubricant that allows societies to function. And it has been shown to lead to higher levels of return for shareholders, higher employee engagement, better relationships, better innovation. There's so many benefits. And there's recent research that tells us that communities and societies with higher trust levels do better in terms of problem solving and economic growth and development and all of those kinds of things. So it's good stuff if you've got it. And you're absolutely right, Linda. Research shows us that it's at the lowest levels we've ever seen. And you're also right. There's good reasons for that, right? We're not always completely irrational. Sometimes we are, but there's a good reason why our trust levels are lower than they've ever been. And what I'd like to do is leave your audience with a bit of an understanding about how trust works and why it's in such dire state, and then steps that we can actually take to make things better. Because a lot of people are talking about trust and how important it is and how little we have of it, but they're not talking about what we can actually do about it. And that's what I have spent the last 20 years of my life focusing on. So if you're ready.
Yes. I am so excited because I love problem solving. I love let's make it better. Muckraking, it has its place, but I'm not interested in just woe is me and dire, doom and gloom. I'm interested in, okay, here's the problem and here's what we can do about it. Because it is empowering and it makes me feel more confident and more happy and more safe, quite frankly.
Well, and this is one of the things that I want to get across. And I'm sorry that we've only got half an hour because it's gonna feel like it flies by. But one of the things that we actually have control over is how we build relationships with others. And it's one of the primary factors that leads to success for us, whether it's in our personal relationships or as a leader or within an organization. And so, we see these complex problems in the world, big, hairy problems, things like climate change and race relations and political divides and, failures of trust in science and government and media and all of those kinds of things. These are problems that require collective collaborative action. And our trust levels are at the lowest we've ever seen. So how do we start thinking about how to fix that? Well, let's first understand what's going on for us. Trust is a willingness to be vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. And that means there's elements of uncertainty and vulnerability embedded in that definition. And so when we decide to trust someone, we ask ourselves two fundamental questions. First question is, how likely am I to be harmed? Which is perceived uncertainty. And the second question is, if I'm harmed, how bad is it going to hurt? Which is perceived vulnerability. And we can think of those as bar graphs. Those are the basis for trust, uncertainty and vulnerability, and they multiply together to give us a level of perceived risk. Now, each of us has a threshold of risk that we're comfortable with. If we go beyond that threshold, we don't trust. If we're beneath it, then we do. And so what that means is that in early relationships, when uncertainty tends to be really high, our perception of the vulnerability has to be really small to still fit below that threshold because they're multiplying together. As our relationship deepens, the uncertainty starts to shrink. That means the range of vulnerability we can tolerate starts to grow and still stay beneath that threshold. And if we're thinking about, well, how do we build trust? It's a simple matter of understanding, where does uncertainty come from? And how do I take steps to reduce that? And where do perceptions of vulnerability come from? And how do I take steps to help people manage those? And so in the book and in my masterclass and in my courses and in my coaching, I focus on helping people understand there are 10 levers that we can pull to build trust. And we each have the ability to build trust. Just some of us are better than others. And you can probably think of examples of people who are just brilliant at building trust and others who are really just brutal at it. And so there's this continuum. Those who aren't very good have a lever that they pull, and they pull it over and over and over again and hope that it works. Those who are better have multiple levers. Those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one. And so what I do is I talk people through what the different levers are, and I help them understand how to pull those levers and practice that skill so that they move along the continuum. If we think about what's going on in our world right now, vulnerability certainly hasn't gone down, but our uncertainty is bouncing all over the place. The rules feel like they're changing, technology is advancing, we're seeing catastrophic events, we're seeing war, we're seeing, pandemics, we're seeing such varying responses to those things. Our uncertainty is just spiking like crazy, which makes it incredibly hard for us to choose to be even more vulnerable than we already are. And that's why trust levels are so low. Does that make sense?
So I'm hearing, as we talk about trust, the thing that kind of stuck out to me is it has to do with our feelings of safety. And do I trust you or do I not trust you depends on, am I safe with you? Am I safe when I listen to what you say? Am I safe when I believe what you say?
Right.
And then, so this is where we're going of, I don't trust because I am trying to protect myself from being harmed. And I think that beautiful, because that was not what I would instantly have thought of. I would think trust means you tell the truth, you say what you're going to do, and you follow through. And you didn't even mention that, which was fascinating. So I'm trying to come up with some new ideas to match what I thought and what you have just presented, so that I can mesh the two. And then when you're talking about, okay, so I'm in a position where I need to build trust. And you haven't mentioned yet, but I'm hoping that at some point you will, that in order for, if I'd like to build trust, I really should be trustworthy. I should be worthy of your trust so that I'm
Yeah.
not going to harm you. And so now I'm going to say, I'm going to assume for this example that I'm safe. My intentions are not to harm you in any way, shape, or form,
Right.
but you don't know me. And so you don't know whether or not I'm a threat. And
Right.
now I'm in a position of I am going to try to build some trust, and I'm going to try to help you feel safe and comfortable with me. And you
Right.
use the analogy of levers of different, like I'm in a switchboard and I've got this tool, that tool, the other tool, and I'm going to use the tool or pull the lever that might work. And you're saying that most people, they've got one that they're
Right.
comfortable with or good with, and then they just keep hitting that button. But a person who is going to be successful at building trust has a whole set of tools, a whole set of levers that they can work and use. And so I'm interested to hear what some of these are. And you also talked about how some people are really good at it and some people are not. And
Yeah.
and my mind is thinking again of, am I safe? Am I safe? Because I've seen some brilliant scams.
Right.
They're so careful and so slow to just, you can trust me. You're safe with me.
Yeah.
Give me your credit card information. And then I don't know why that's part of trust building because it just is not wise. But and then they rob me. I don't
Yes.
hate
Well,
that.
and we've seen this with politicians as well, right? Where they convince
Yeah.
us that the stakes are catastrophic. I'm going to really heighten your sense of vulnerability so that you can't listen to anyone else at all. You can't tolerate any uncertainty. You're just going to stick with what you're used to. Don't change your mind because it's the stakes are too high.
Don't change your mind. The stakes are too high.
Right.
Wow. So when we get entrenched in our I'm for team red, I'm for team blue, then do not I'm not safe if I don't stick with exactly what I'm used to.
Right. And no matter what happens, I'm safe here. It's like an abusive parent or an abusive spouse. Things are bad, but boy, they'd be a lot worse if you left. Watch out if you leave because things are going to get so much worse.
You know,
And
I just spoke to a woman in a domestic violence relationship, and she lived exactly what you're describing. He
yeah,
would beat the crap out of her and then convince her that if she left, oh, you're not safe out there.
yeah.
So, I don't know. This messes with people's head. Okay.
So
So, how
you've
do we
nailed it.
fix
So
this? Shall we?
yeah, so let's talk about so we've got these mechanisms of uncertainty and vulnerability that leads to the perception of risk. And then we make that decision. We either trust or we don't. And then we have perceived outcomes, right? We interpret the world through stories. And so you and I can have exactly the same experience, but have a dramatically different story about what happened or a perception of whether it was success or a failure. And so that then feeds back into our next interaction together. So when you invite me back for another episode on your podcast, our conversation now is going to have an impact on your perception of me for the next time we go around, and for your listeners' perception. Oh, this is that Darryl guy. He talked before and this is what he said. And so this is what my expectations are. And it's updated. In the middle of all this is our emotional states, whether we like or dislike someone else. And so 99% of the trust literature treats people like they're rational actors. And Linda, I don't know if you've met people before, but but we're not always rational, right? And so
I've met a few of those.
yeah. And so we use our emotions, our whether we like or dislike somebody else, as a filter or a frame of reference or a story to find confirming evidence. And the stronger our emotional states are, the less rational we become. So both love and hate are blind. When I wrote my doctoral thesis, it was about building trust in hostile environments. And this was sort of the place where I came to where I said, you know, all of our research is sort of treating people like they're rational actors, but they're not. And especially when things get hostile, right? And this is why these conflicts are so resilient, is because people, when they hate each other, they can't hear new information and interpret it in a rational, reasonable way. We need to reset those emotional states a little bit first. So I said there are 10 levers. There's 4 of them in uncertainty. There's 2 of them in vulnerability, which is sort of what do I think is at stake and how does it get valued? There's 2 of them in perceived outcomes, which is, was it a success or a failure and who gets the credit or the blame? And there's 2 of them within our emotional states. How strongly we feel about the other party and, how we interpret the world. Like, are our emotional states reasonable? Because we're irrational with those we love and we're irrational with those we hate. And we see this playing out on the political stage right now in the US, right? Where people keep saying about the other side, they're saying the same thing. Why won't they listen to reason? Right? And it's because it's a profoundly emotional issue. So let's start with uncertainty. Uncertainty comes from 2 places. It comes from us as individuals, and it comes from the context that we're embedded in. And so for us as individuals, there's 3 levers that we can possibly pull. There's benevolence, integrity, and ability. Benevolence is the belief you've got my best interest at heart and that you'll act in my best interest, even if it's not in your own short-term best interest. Integrity is, do I follow through on my promises and do my actions line up with the values that I express? And ability is, do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And that's our favorite lever, right? I've got these kinds of credentials, this much experience, this background, this many customers served, whatever it happens to be. Now, these are each levers that we can pull, but a lot of times what I run into is people saying, well, I do that. And I got to tell you, Linda, if I tell you I'm benevolent, it doesn't carry nearly as much freight as if you believe it, right? If you say, yeah, Darryl's benevolent. And so my perception of those things when I'm trying to build trust with somebody else is almost irrelevant. And you were bang on before when you asked, about how trustworthy I am. What I try to do is help people close the gap between how much they should be trusted and how much they actually are. And so big part of that is around communication. Now, let's start with the benevolence lever, right? It's one of my favorites. And when I work with families and I ask the parents who here has their kids' best interest at heart, all the hands go up because of course they do, right? When I flip the question and say, how many of your kids would say that? It's about a third, and it's somewhat hesitant. And so if it's not obvious in a place where it's supposed to be obvious, how the heck do we convince other people that we have their best interest at heart? How do we show benevolence as a leader, as a spouse, as a parent? How do we show that in a way that actually lands? Well, often where we find the misstep is that we've assumed what their best interests are without actually including them in the conversation.
Wow.
And so when I think about my sons, I have 2 sons. They're the center of my universe. They mean more to me than anything on the planet. Thomas is about to turn 22 and Alexander's about to turn 19. When Thomas was 12, he said to me, Dad, he said, even when you're upset with me, I know it's about what's best for me. That's what I like to call winning. Because once they've got that narrative, it means we can have conversations and we get the benefit of the doubt, right? And if we screw up, they assume that our intent was good. And so I talk people through how do we actually pull that lever, right? So here's what I'd encourage you and your listeners to do. Find someone to practice with, because this is a big part of the learning journey for me. And this is what I went through the book, I tried to put everything in there, the whole model, and then how to pull all the levers and examples of pulling the levers and case studies and all that kind of stuff, because I really want people to get this and apply it. And so let's talk about pulling the benevolence lever. you're going to have a conversation with someone, and it's going to be someone that you can practice with. So not someone who's madly in love with you already, which for you may be a challenge, or someone, who just can't stand you, but someone that you can practice with. And you're going to say, I was talking to this guy, Darryl, and he was talking about trust. And he said benevolence is actually really important, this belief that you've got my best interest at heart. And I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that? Now, the other person's going to go, oh, yeah, I've had it happen to me, or I've seen it happen. And we get a little curious about that, right? So what happened? What was your intent? How did it land? And then we narrow the funnel a little bit with them. And we say, have you ever had somebody really have your back? Have you ever experienced it where somebody really was benevolent? And that's going to provoke a thoughtful moment for them. What happened? What did they do? How did it feel? And now we're starting to get hints about what benevolence looks like for that person. Then we narrow the funnel further. We say, what is success for you? How do I help you get there? What would it look like if I was benevolent to you? Now we've got a chance to be transparent. And later on, when we try to do something that's in their best interest, we can say, you remember when you told me that this is what benevolence looked like? This is me trying to do that. So at the start of this conversation, I asked you what an excellent guest would look like. And I asked you what would it impact your listeners. And I'm trying to deliver against that. How does that feel?
You did. You started with a question. And the question was, as you restated, and I talked about how I am about hope, healing, and happiness, and about delivering value in the content. And I feel like you are delivering, and that's beautiful. So thank you for bringing that to my awareness, that you practiced what you preach here.
Trying to role model, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
that people can go away and practice these skills. And what I find is that when people practice, they'll come back and they'll say, it wasn't quite me. It felt a little awkward. It felt a little uncomfortable, but man, was the response positive, right? Because if I engage with you and I tell you, Linda, I'd like to build a stronger relationship with you, so I'm going to practice some of these things. Is that okay? You're fine with me messing it up. The fact that I'm trying is what really matters, and that I've been intentional about it. So that's what I'm about in the world. That's what I'm trying to do, is make the world a better place by helping people take these skills and actually apply them, to have a shared vocabulary, because the impact has been remarkable.
The impact has been remarkable. Do you have some examples of applying these things and giving us a before and after kind of picture?
I do. So one of my favorite stories, I've got a couple of stories that I actually love to tell. One is, I had a student, I was teaching in Luxembourg. I was teaching MBA students. And I told them all at the start of the class, you have to pick someone you're going to practice these skills with. And one of them was a dad. And he said, I want to practice with my sons. They're 5 and 3. And I said, okay. And I said, so what is it that makes you want to practice with them? He said, I've spent most of their lives away. I've been working in Brazil and they live in Luxembourg. And we're completely alienated. And I think the relationship is broken forever.
Oh.
Which is heartbreaking, right? And he said, I get around them. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I get nervous. I get frustrated. I yell. I always seem to do the wrong thing. I said, okay. And so as we started to go through the course, I was coaching him and having conversations with him. At the end of the 3-month course, his final report was, things have changed completely. My sons run to me. They throw themselves on me. They tell me they love me all the time. They fight over who gets to sit next to me at meals. They beg me to read them stories at night. That's not the only time I've experienced that, right? I've had situations where people have sent me emails saying, you remember that relationship I told you was so broken? I'm sitting with that person now and having an incredible conversation, and it's completely changed. So that's the struggle for me, is I see the level of trust in the world, And I feel like I'm dropping grains of sand in the ocean. And what I need, Linda, is for you and your listeners to come and help me pick up great big rocks and make huge splashes. And so I'm trying to get people, and this is not some self-centered, hey, buy my book thing. I'm trying to get people to share the vocabulary, to understand that there's something we can actually do about these things. There's an impact we can have in the world that can reverse this trend. We need to be more intentional, and we need to be a little more aware. And the second story is about my son, Alexander, and I adore my sons. I start with a relentlessly positive story about my sons, and they know that I'm on their side. When my son was younger, he's distractible. It's one of the traits that he has. He's highly distractible, and it means he's intelligent and funny and aware and empathetic and late. So there are positive things that come from this and negative things that come from this, right? And he was always late and struggling to get to places on time and all that kind of stuff. And I found myself one day leaning against a tree outside of his school, waiting for him to arrive. And all the other kids had come out, and the teachers had come out, and the janitor's trying to lock up. And he's just more late than usual. And so he finally comes trudging up to me. And I've had time to think about this. And, his mother and I had separated, were divorcing. And so I got limited time with him. And so there was this anxiety that I was experiencing. And as he approaches me, I start to think about, how am I going to respond to this? I could be angry and frustrated and give him a hard time about it, which is what everyone is doing. And it's not changing the behavior. It's not intentional. It's not him. He's not trying to send me a message. It's not personal. Or I could accept him for who he is, all that he is, and love him for every fiber of his being. And so he approaches me with his head down, his feet dragging. He says, "Dad, I'm sorry I'm late." And I looked at him and I said, "Buddy, you're worth the wait." And the change that came over him, the transition that simple statement made in our relationship, that moment of acceptance and unconditional love and affection. I said, whoever comes next can wait. Nothing is more important than you. And that's how we show benevolence. That's what he needed in that moment. And we have such a profoundly positive relationship. What I realized with my sons, who I have incredibly close relationships with, is as we were going through the divorce process, I didn't have control over so many things with regard to them, but I did control how I showed up. And that was, in fact, the only thing I controlled. And I became very intentional about being the best person I could be with them and using the model that I use with them relentlessly and not hiding it, being very intentional and transparent. I talked to them about the model. It's future-proofed them. They're both thriving right now, doing incredibly well, facing some significant challenges, but thriving in that space. And a lot of it comes down to their ability to build relationships with others.
Because you have modeled how to do it properly.
Yeah.
And we tend to repeat the cycle. So if our parents did a great job, then we kind of naturally do a great job. And if our parents did a horrible job, we naturally do a horrible job. And it takes some effort to not go back to that default method of handling things, like yelling and getting upset. I love that of all the levers that you have, and I'm excited to read your book and to hear all of them, because the one that you shared has been so powerful and impactful, where I feel like, ooh, yes, that would work. As we talked earlier about, in order to have someone trust me, I need to be trustworthy.
Right.
So as I am trying to show benevolence, I also have to have it.
Right.
And that means that I am thinking about how am I showing up? And then doing things like asking questions and getting that clarification of what do you need? And in the case with your son, you knew what he needed.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't know someone well enough that we know what it is that they need, and we need a little bit more information because our very best guess is wrong.
Right.
And that happens a lot when we're trying to communicate. So, wow.
Well,
Benevolent.
let's think about our kids, right?
Yeah.
We think about their best interests today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, 10 years from now. We want them engaged in behaviors right now that will help them a decade from now. Do you hold yourself to that standard? I don't. Right? And they're thinking about right now. So for us to show them that we're benevolent, for us to earn the right to talk about tomorrow, we have to help them now. We have to be aware of what success looks like for them in this moment and step up in this moment. And so that means when they make a mistake, when they fall short, rather than pouncing on them, we need to get curious and come alongside. We need to say, what led you to that? How do I help you make a better decision next time? How do I act as a coach instead of a drill sergeant? And so often, you're right, we fall back on the patterns we're used to because we don't know another path. And I'm saying there's another path. And really all we need to do is be a bit more intentional about it, a bit more thoughtful about it.
Absolutely. And I love the word you use about getting curious. And getting curious means we're going to ask some questions. We're going to find out some more information before we take maybe even our next step. So
Yeah.
that's a really big deal. Isn't it wonderful that there is another way, something different than the default setting? And isn't
Mm-hmm.
it wonderful that we can change and do so in a way that improves our lives and our relationships? Because it is those interactions with other people that bring fulfillment for most people. I
Yeah.
mean, it is a key element to our happiness and is that connection. And so learning what do I need to do to be successful in this, that is huge. What you're doing is so important and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And it's absolutely one of the ways to future-proof both ourselves and those that come after us. Right? Because being excellent, the ability lever is a moving target, right? And it's moving faster and faster.
Mhm.
And integrity is getting harder because things are changing so fast. It's hard for me to make a commitment to you that's going to be 6 months from now because the world is moving so fast. But that benevolence lever, I can pull that all day, right? That doesn't go away. Me caring about you, it lands and it lands consistently. And it gives you the reason to think, well, if Darryl isn't good, if he's not exceptional, I can have a conversation with him about what exceptional looks like. And he would want to get better, or he would help me find someone who is.
Nice.
And so it allows us to have conversations we're not having. Right. And so that's part of how we start to rebuild trust within our communities and within our societies is we start to become more aware of what trust is and how it works. And then we start practicing pulling these levers. And one of the challenges that we face as leaders and as parents and as spouses, we feel this need to be perfect or to pretend we're perfect. And I've started talking about leading with imperfections, right? Acknowledging that we're not perfect. And one of the messages I'm trying to get across to leaders, and I think that would resonate for parents as well, is to be able to say, what would have made me a great leader 10 years ago? It's not the same thing that would make me a great leader today. And what will make me a great leader 3 years from now is going to be different again. I'm going to have to learn and grow and develop and try new things. I will stumble. I may fall. My expectation is that when I do that, you'll be there supporting me, helping me learn from that mistake, because that's exactly what I'm going to be doing for you.
Ooh. And that makes all the difference.
Makes all the difference. And imagine if we were to do that as parents. I'm not perfect, right? I have an incredible number of flaws. My sons know that. For a complete list, you'd have to check out my ex-wife's blog, um, but I am a flawed human being. And when we start with that notion, my sons are okay with it. And so when I do fall or when I do stumble, it's a chance for us to laugh and acknowledge and grow together and to even be stronger in our relationship together.
I love that. And you're talking about the different levers, and the one that we tend to pull is about I am qualified. I can't remember the exact word you used, but
Ability. Yeah.
ability. I'm the guy. So sometimes as a parent and as a leader, as a whatever, we're trying so hard to pull that lever of ability that we can't admit that we're wrong, because then that would make you question my ability. And
Right.
so by recognizing that there's more than one aspect, more than one facet to this, then that allows me to be imperfect and learning and growing. And I'm okay, because you can trust that my intent is good.
Right.
And I am willing to admit when I make a mistake. And the interesting thing is, rather than making that diminish someone's trust, it actually increases.
It
Because guess what?
does.
They can see that I made a mistake. I can pretend that I didn't make a mistake, but I'd be lying, and you'd know that I'm lying. And so that all of a sudden kind of lowers your impression of me and of who I am and what I am. So that's, I
It
think
it
it's
gives us a chance to role model, right? To show that it's okay to be imperfect, that it's okay to make mistakes. And what I say to my sons when I mess up is I say, you know what? I didn't handle it the way I would have liked to. And their first default is, it's okay, Dad. It was my fault, or it was a situation, or whatever, right? They're trying to make excuses for me. And I go, that all may be true, but I still wish I'd handled it differently. And maybe if I'd had another chance, this is the way that I would have done that. And so it role models for them that it's okay not to be perfect, that it's okay to learn new things and make mistakes, because innovation doesn't happen without mistakes. And we like to pull the ability lever, but I got to tell you, we do a really poor job of defining it. I'll ask senior executives, who here's a great leader, and all the hands will go up, and I'll say, that's awesome. What does that mean? And they'll just look at me, right? Like, well, it just seems like something I should think I'm good at. Well, let's start defining it, right? And this is one of the conversations. This is another way to pull one of the levers, the ability lever. And again, I did this at the start of the show. What would a good guest look like? Right? So let's have you help me define what excellence is. And in a perfect world, we'd actually get feedback from your guests, and they say, next time Darryl's on, this is what we'd like to hear from him. And so we start to co-define, here's what excellence looks like. Here's how I'm going to pull that lever. And then I can check back in with you. And so when I do workshops, I'll say to people, what would a great workshop look like? What would have to happen in this workshop for you to say, wow, that was one of the best workshops I ever experienced? And they tell me what good looks like, what a good outcome looks like. And that allows me to focus on that and to make sure that I achieve it, and so that there wasn't some misunderstanding along the way. And at the end, I'm able to circle back and say, this is what you told me good was. How'd we do?
wow. And to accept feedback means we have to let our ego go a little bit,
Yeah.
because maybe, I mean, if I came, I would think, well, I have put my heart and soul into this. I have done my very best. And you said that there's something you didn't like. Ouch. So to
Right.
be able to say, okay, I'm good with that. Let's try that. That takes, again, a little bit of courage, I think, and some confidence. Wow, Darryl, this has been amazing. All right. Is there anything else you just want to make sure that we cover before we close?
I want people to remember that trust is incredibly important and that we can do something about it. It's a skill we can build.
Excellent. Thank you so much. In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Stephen Covey. He said, "Trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's the foundational principle that holds all relationships." Today, I invite our listeners to be worthy of trust. See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Linda's Corner, please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. I also invite you to check out my nonprofit, Hope for Healing, at the website hopeforhealingfoundation.org. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, or Amazon bestseller, You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.